January 22nd, 1943, Guadalcanal, Point Cruz Groves. 14 Americans dead in 72 hours. 11 Japanese snipers hidden somewhere in the dense jungle canopy, killing with impunity. Entire patrols wiped out without ever seeing the enemy. The 132nd Infantry Regiment was being systematically destroyed by an invisible force they couldn't locate, couldn't counter, couldn't stop. Then Second Lieutenant John George showed up carrying a rifle he'd bought from a catalogue with 2 years of National Guard pay, a civilian hunting rifle, a Winchester Model 70 with a sporting scope. Soldiers looked at it and laughed. "That's a deer rifle. This is war." Officers were more direct. "Put that toy away and get a real weapon." George was a 27-year-old Illinois state shooting champion with 0 confirmed kills. He'd never shot at a human target, never been in combat, just won a lot of trophies shooting paper targets at known distances in controlled conditions. 4 days later, 11 Japanese snipers were dead, 12 rounds fired, 92% hit rate. Nobody was laughing anymore, because what George proved in those 4 days would change American sniper doctrine and save hundreds of American lives. And it started with everyone mocking the mail-order rifle. The Winchester Model 70 was everything a military rifle shouldn't be. Bolt action in an era when semi-automatic was becoming standard. 5-round internal magazine when the M1 Garand held 8 rounds and didn't require manual cycling between shots. 9 pounds before optics, heavy and cumbersome compared to sleek military designs. The Lyman Alaskan 2.5x scope added another 12 ounces and looked distinctly civilian with its hunting-style reticle. George had bought the rifle years before the war for competitive shooting and hunting. When he was called up, he brought it with him because it was the rifle he knew. The rifle he'd fired thousands of rounds through. The rifle whose trigger pull he understood instinctively, whose point of impact he knew at every range, whose peculiarities were as familiar as his own heartbeat. The Army issued M1 Garands to infantry. Semi-automatic, gas-operated, 8-round N-block clip, excellent reliability, proven in combat. That was what professional soldiers carried. George showed up with a bolt-action hunting rifle like he was headed to deer camp instead of war. His fellow soldiers thought he was crazy or arrogant or both. The weapon became a running joke. George's mail-order special. The deer slayer. Catalogue rifle. Officers were less amused. This wasn't a hunting trip. This was the Pacific theatre where the Japanese had proven themselves masters of jungle warfare and expert snipers who could remain hidden for days while picking off American soldiers one by one. Point Cruz was a nightmare. The Marines had tried to clear the area west of the perimeter for weeks. They'd taken casualties, made minimal progress, and eventually called for relief. The 132nd Infantry took over in late December 1942. The situation got worse. Japanese snipers owned the jungle canopy. They tied themselves into banyan trees 80-90 feet above the ground, camouflaged so perfectly that American patrols walked underneath them without seeing anything until the shooting started. The Americans tried everything. They fired into likely trees with automatic weapons, wasting ammunition on empty foliage. They called in artillery, destroying acres of jungle and never touching the snipers who'd already relocated. They sent patrol after patrol trying to draw fire and locate enemy positions. The patrols just died. 14 men in 72 hours. The battalion was at a breaking point. Morale collapsed. Nobody wanted to go on patrol. Nobody wanted to volunteer for forward positions. Because the Japanese snipers were invisible, patient, and deadly accurate. On January 21st, George's battalion commander summoned him. The commander had heard about George's civilian shooting accomplishments. State champion, multiple competition wins, supposed to be an excellent marksman. "You claim to be a shooter. You have that hunting rifle. Go hunting." It wasn't confidence. It was desperation. They'd tried everything else. Might as well try the guy with the deer rifle. January 22nd, dawn. George positioned himself alone in the ruins of a Japanese bunker with clear sightlines west toward the grove where most American casualties had occurred. No spotter, no radio, no backup, just 60 rounds of .3006 ball ammunition and his Winchester. The professional military approach would have been a sniper team with specialized equipment, established communications, supporting elements. George's approach was pure hunter. Find good position, wait for prey, shoot when opportunity presents. He settled in and started glassing the trees with his 2.5 times scope. Low magnification by sniper standards, but enough to see detail at 200 to 300 yards. More importantly, the scope was designed for hunting in variable light conditions. It gathered light well and remained clear even in dawn and dusk when military scopes often struggled. George spent the first hour just watching, learning the terrain, identifying likely positions, understanding light and shadow patterns. This was hunting behavior, not military doctrine. Then he saw movement. Slight. 240 yards distant, 87 feet up in a massive banyan tree, a Japanese sniper adjusting position. George tracked the movement, calculated the shot, controlled his breathing, squeezed the trigger. The Winchester barked once. The Japanese sniper fell 87 feet and hit the ground dead. Before George could fully process his first kill, a second Japanese sniper moved to investigate what happened to the first. Fatal mistake. George already had the second target in his scope. 1 shot, 2 dead. That's when the Japanese realized they had a problem. The pattern established itself over the next 2 days. George would identify a position, take the shot, then immediately relocate before Japanese observers could pinpoint his location. The bolt-action rifle that everyone mocked became an advantage. The slower rate of fire enforced discipline. Each shot was deliberate, calculated, precise. No wasted ammunition, no hasty follow-ups that gave away position, just surgical removal of targets. By the afternoon of January 23rd, George had killed 6 Japanese snipers. That's when the Japanese adapted. They stopped moving during daylight hours. Complete stillness, not even minor position adjustments. They were trying to become invisible, hoping the American sniper would lose patience and reveal his position by firing at false targets. They also started trying to locate George. Japanese observers scanned the American lines looking for the source of the deadly accurate fire, and they brought in mortars. After George's 6th kill, Japanese mortar rounds started falling on his bunker position. They'd finally identified his approximate location and were attempting to kill him with indirect fire. Except George had already moved. He'd relocated to a water-filled shell crater 50 meters from his original position, submerged to his neck, with only his head and rifle above water. Invisible from any angle except directly overhead. The mortars destroyed the bunker. George watched from his crater, waiting for the barrage to end so he could resume hunting. January 24th brought a new level of tactical sophistication. George was scanning likely sniper positions when he noticed something odd. One tree had a Japanese soldier positioned in an almost obvious location. Too obvious. The camouflage was good, but not perfect. The position was strong, but slightly exposed. Everything about it screamed target. George didn't shoot, because he recognized what he was seeing. Bait. The Japanese had positioned a decoy sniper to draw fire, hoping the American shooter would reveal his position by taking the shot. It was clever. Most marksmen would have fired immediately upon seeing what appeared to be an enemy sniper. George waited. He kept his scope on the decoy, but didn't shoot. He watched the surrounding area, looking for the real threat, and he found it. 300 yards away, partially concealed in dense foliage, was the actual sniper, positioned perfectly to observe and shoot anyone who fired at the decoy. The patience required for this kind of observation is extraordinary. Most soldiers don't have it. But George had spent years hunting white-tailed deer, animals that move carefully and conceal themselves expertly. He understood prey behavior, and he understood that sometimes the prey sets its own traps. He adjusted his aim. The real sniper was a more difficult shot, partially obscured, greater range, poor angle. George waited for the slightest movement. When it came, he fired. One shot. The true sniper fell. Then George immediately shifted back to the decoy position and fired a second shot before that soldier could relocate. 2 shots, 2 kills. Counter-decoy tactics that weren't in any military manual. Just hunting instinct applied to human prey. The final engagement was the most dangerous. By January 25th, George had killed 9 Japanese snipers. The remaining 2 changed tactics completely. Instead of staying in elevated positions, they came down to ground level and started stalking him. George was in a different crater, this one deeper and offering better concealment. He'd submerged himself completely in muddy water with only his eyes and the rifle barrel above surface. Hours passed. No movement, no sound except jungle noise. Then he saw them. 2 Japanese soldiers crawling through the undergrowth, moving slowly toward his last known position. They were hunting him, 50 yards away, then 40, then 30. George remained absolutely still, submerged in water, controlling his breathing so even the surface wouldn't ripple. The soldiers were experienced, cautious, checking every possible firing position as they advanced. At 20 yards, George knew he had to act. If they got any closer, his advantage disappeared. He slowly rose from the water. The Winchester came up to his shoulder in a single smooth motion. First shot, first soldier dead. Bolt action cycled. Second shot, second soldier dead. Before George could even process what had just happened, Japanese infantry appeared, a patrol or reinforcement element responding to the gunfire. George was exposed, standing in a crater, bolt-action rifle with 3 rounds left in the magazine. The Japanese opened fire. George returned fire. 5 shots, 3 Japanese soldiers dead. Then he was out of ammunition in the rifle and completely exposed. He made the only logical decision, tactical withdrawal. He abandoned his position and sprinted back toward American lines under fire. Bullets snapping past, branches exploding around him. He made it back, somehow. 11 Japanese snipers dead, 3 additional infantry casualties, 19 rounds fired total across all engagements, 14 hits, 74% accuracy under combat conditions. For the sniper engagement specifically, 12 rounds fired, 11 hits, 92% accuracy. The response from his battalion was immediate and profound. The area that had been a death trap for 2 weeks was suddenly clear. American patrols could move without being systematically destroyed. Supply lines opened. The Point Cruz groves that had cost 14 American lives in 72 hours were now under American control. January 27th, George received new orders. Stop shooting, start teaching. The battalion had acquired 14 Springfield rifles equipped with inertial scopes, military sniper rifles that had been sitting unused because nobody knew how to employ them effectively. George was ordered to train expert marksmen as snipers. 40 men with proven marksmanship skills but no tactical training. George taught them what he knew. Not military doctrine because he didn't know military doctrine. He taught them hunting. Breathing control from deer hunting, trigger squeeze from competitive shooting, wind reading from prairie shooting, where wind constantly affects bullet trajectory, position selection from years of hunting in varied terrain. The critical lesson, shot discipline. Don't shoot unless the shot is certain. Don't shoot unless you can relocate before enemy response. Don't shoot to wound. Every trigger pull must produce a kill. The training was rapid because the battalion needed snipers immediately. Within days, George's newly trained marksmen were deployed in 2-man teams, shooter and spotter, providing mutual support and tactical flexibility. The results were staggering. By February 9th, 1943, George's sniper section had achieved 74 confirmed kills with 0 American casualties. 74 in less than 2 weeks. The Japanese had owned the jungle canopy. Now American snipers were systematically eliminating Japanese observers, machine gunners, and officers. The psychological impact matched the physical casualties. Japanese units became cautious, slow, reluctant to expose themselves. American forces gained freedom of movement that had been impossible weeks earlier. Division headquarters officially recognized the sniper section. George was recommended for a Bronze Star. The Winchester Model 70, that had been mocked as a mail-order toy, was now the standard against which military sniper rifles were compared. Officers who'd told George to put away his hunting rifle were now asking how they could acquire similar weapons for their units. The transformation was complete. From ridicule to reverence in 4 days of combat. George himself was wounded on February 7th when a Japanese rifleman hit him in the left shoulder during a patrol. The wound was relatively minor. He recovered quickly and returned to duty. By February 9th, the Japanese completed their evacuation of Guadalcanal. The campaign was over. American victory secured in part by snipers who'd learned their craft from a man with a mail-order rifle. George wasn't finished. He volunteered for a classified jungle warfare operation in Burma with Merrill's Marauders, a long-range penetration unit modelled after British Chindits. The mission profile was completely different from Guadalcanal. Instead of static positions and defensive operations, the Marauders conducted deep penetration raids behind Japanese lines. Long marches through mountainous jungle, limited resupply, emphasis on speed and mobility over firepower. George recognized that his Winchester, perfect for Guadalcanal's conditions, was too heavy for Burma. He modified it. Replaced the Lyman Alaskan 2.5 times scope with a lighter Weaver 330. Swapped the wooden stock for a synthetic version that weighed less and resisted jungle humidity better. The modifications reduced the rifle's weight from 9 pounds 12 ounces to 8 pounds 14 ounces. Every ounce mattered when carrying it through 700 miles of jungle over 3 months. The Burma campaign was brutal. The Marauders marched further than any American unit in the Pacific Theater. They fought in dozens of small engagements and ambushes. But the nature of combat was different: close quarters, fast-moving, emphasis on automatic weapons and firepower over precision shooting. George used his Winchester for only 3 confirmed long-range shots during the entire campaign. All 3 were kills. But the opportunities for sniper work were rare. Most combat happened at ranges where any rifle would work. The Winchester's precision advantage was irrelevant when shooting at targets 30 yards away in dense jungle. More Marauders died from disease than combat. Malaria, dysentery, typhus, and simple exhaustion killed or incapacitated more men than Japanese bullets. George contracted malaria but continued operating until the unit captured Myetkina Airfield in May 1944. At that point, the Marauders were combat ineffective. They'd accomplished their mission but were physically destroyed. George was evacuated in June 1944, promoted to captain, and sent back to the United States. He never fired his Winchester in combat again. The rifle that had been so devastatingly effective on Guadalcanal had proven less useful in Burma's close-quarters jungle fighting. George recognized what this meant. Warfare was evolving. The bolt-action precision rifle was being superseded by semi-automatic weapons that traded some accuracy for much higher rates of fire. The M1 Garand that he'd initially dismissed as inferior to his Winchester was actually superior for most combat situations. The Winchester excelled in specific circumstances: static positions, known ranges, high-value targets requiring precision. But modern infantry combat increasingly resembled Burma: fast-moving, close quarters, emphasizing firepower and mobility. The era of the bolt-action sniper rifle was ending. George understood this and didn't resist it. He'd proven what needed to be proven. Skill and the right tool for the right situation could achieve extraordinary results. But tool selection had to match combat requirements, not personal preference. July 1944, George began training infantry officers at Fort Benning, Georgia. His focus, marksmanship fundamentals and small unit jungle tactics. He taught thousands of officers and NCOs over the following months, spreading the lessons learned on Guadalcanal and Burma throughout the army. The sniper techniques he'd pioneered were incorporated into formal training programs. The concept of two-man sniper teams became standard doctrine. The emphasis on shot discipline and position selection became core principles of American sniper training. George's influence extended far beyond the 11 Japanese snipers he'd killed personally. After the war, George pursued education at Princeton and Oxford, then worked in African-American relations and foreign affairs. He lived a distinguished post-military life, but he never forgot the combat experiences that had defined him. In 1947, he published a detailed manuscript documenting his wartime service. The National Rifle Association published it as Shots Fired in Anger, and it immediately became a classic reference for firearms enthusiasts and military historians. The book combined technical discussion of weapons with tactical analysis of combat employment. It was honest, detailed, and brutally frank about what worked and what didn't. George lived to see the evolution of military sniping through Korea, Vietnam, and the Gulf War. He watched as formal sniper schools were established, as dedicated sniper rifles were developed, as the specialty he'd helped pioneer became a formal military occupation. He died on January 3, 2009, at age 90. His Winchester Model 70 is displayed at the National Firearms Museum in Fairfax, Virginia, a symbol of how individual skill and appropriate tool selection can achieve results that superior numbers and better equipment cannot. The statistics from those 4 days on Guadalcanal remain remarkable by any measure. 11 confirmed sniper kills using 12 rounds, 92% hit rate, 0 American casualties while operating. Tactical success that had eluded an entire battalion for 2 weeks, achieved by one man in 4 days. The subsequent training program, 74 confirmed kills in 2 weeks with 0 sniper casualties. These aren't just impressive numbers. They represent a fundamental shift in how the American military approached sniper warfare. Before George, sniping was an ad hoc specialty practiced by naturally skilled shooters without formal training or doctrine. After George, it became a recognized discipline with training programs, established tactics, and dedicated equipment. The transformation happened because George proved it could work. The rifle that soldiers mocked as a mail-order toy killed more enemy soldiers per round fired than any military sniper rifle in the Pacific Theater. That forced the Army to reconsider assumptions about what constituted appropriate sniper equipment. Maybe civilian hunting rifles, designed for precision at unknown ranges under variable conditions, were actually better suited to sniper work than military rifles designed for battlefield reliability and firepower. Maybe bolt-action designs, despite their slower rate of fire, enforced the shot discipline that made sniping effective. Maybe the tools that civilians used for hunting were more appropriate for hunting humans than the tools designed by military bureaucracies. The cultural impact extended beyond equipment. George's success demonstrated that combat effectiveness came from matching skills and tools to requirements, not from following established doctrine. Military doctrine said use military weapons. George used a hunting rifle and outperformed everyone following doctrine. Military doctrine said snipers needed specialized training. George succeeded with hunting experience and competitive shooting background. Military doctrine said modern infantry needed semi-automatic weapons. George proved that in specific circumstances, bolt-action precision beats semi-automatic volume. Each of these contradictions forced military planners to reconsider assumptions. The result was a more flexible, adaptive approach to sniper employment that continues to this day. Modern military snipers train with multiple weapons systems, choosing tools based on mission requirements rather than doctrinal preference. They emphasize fieldcraft and stalking skills derived from hunting rather than purely military training. They understand that sometimes the unconventional approach produces better results than the approved method. George's legacy is visible in every one of these principles. The mockery he faced when he showed up with his Winchester was natural. It violated expectations, it contradicted doctrine, it looked unprofessional. Then it worked, spectacularly, and that forced everyone to reconsider what professional actually meant. The men who mocked George's mail-order rifle stopped mocking when they saw the results. 11 dead Japanese snipers who had been terrorizing American positions for weeks. An area cleared that had been impassable. American lives saved because one man with the right tool could eliminate threats that hundreds of soldiers with standard equipment couldn't touch. The soldiers who survived Point Cruz because George cleared the snipers didn't care whether his rifle came from a military armory or a Sears catalogue. They cared that it worked. The officers who initially dismissed George as an amateur with inappropriate equipment ended up requesting similar rifles for their own units. The transformation from ridicule to respect wasn't gradual. It happened in 4 days. That's how long it took for results to override prejudice. The lesson transcends World War II and sniper warfare. It's about the danger of dismissing unconventional approaches without evidence. It's about the value of expertise, even when it comes from unexpected sources. It's about matching tools to requirements rather than following prescribed solutions. George succeeded because his tool was appropriate for his task, his skills were developed for exactly the conditions he faced, and he understood his environment better than his enemies understood theirs. None of that required military approval or doctrinal validation, it just required competence and proper tool selection. When George published Shots Fired in Anger in 1947, the book became required reading for serious students of small arms and military tactics, not because it glorified combat or celebrated killing, because it honestly analysed what worked, what didn't, and why. George described the Winchester's strengths: accuracy, familiar handling, excellent trigger, reliable function. He also described its weaknesses: slow bolt action, limited capacity, excessive weight for jungle warfare. He explained why it was perfect for Guadalcanal and less suitable for Burma. This kind of honest assessment was rare in military literature. Most official publications emphasized doctrine and approved solutions. George wrote about reality. The book influenced multiple generations of military marksmen and hunters. It's still cited in modern sniper training literature, not as historical curiosity but as practical reference for understanding how rifles perform in combat. That's remarkable. A book written over 75 years ago remains relevant because its insights were based on actual experience rather than theory. George shot at human beings who shot back. His observations carried weight because they were tested under conditions where mistakes meant death. The Winchester Model 70 in the museum is a physical artifact of those observations. It's not just a rifle. It's evidence that conventional wisdom can be wrong and that results matter more than approval. The final irony is that George proved both that his Winchester was superior to military rifles in specific conditions and that military doctrine was right to prefer semi-automatic weapons for general infantry use. Both things were true simultaneously. The Winchester's bolt-action design enforced shot discipline that made George more effective as a sniper, but the M1 Garand's semi-automatic design made ordinary infantry more effective in typical combat. The lesson isn't that one approach is universally better. It's that different situations require different solutions. George understood this instinctively. That's why he modified his Winchester for Burma, recognizing that the perfect Guadalcanal configuration was wrong for different terrain and tactics. That's why he never argued that all infantry should carry bolt-action rifles even after proving their effectiveness in his hands. He understood context. The mail-order rifle was perfect for hunting Japanese snipers from static positions at known ranges. It would have been terrible for assaulting bunkers or conducting patrols. The soldiers who mocked it were wrong for George's situation but would have been right for their own. Military effectiveness requires matching capabilities to requirements. George did that better than anyone. 11 Japanese snipers in 4 days. 74 additional enemy casualties in 2 weeks through his trained snipers. Hundreds of American lives saved because one man understood his tool, knew his craft, and applied both appropriately. That's not luck, that's competence. The kind of competence that changes doctrine, saves lives, and ends up in museums 75 years later as evidence of what's possible when skill meets opportunity with the right tool in hand. They mocked his mail-order rifle until it killed 11 Japanese snipers in 4 days and proved that sometimes the best tool is the one you know how to use perfectly, even if it came from a catalogue.